I see, muttered Butler. What did you say? Asked Carrere. Nothing. I just don't like having my photo taken. A spark of Luke's greedy personality surfaced. I like that watch on your wrist. It looks expensive. Is it a Rolex? You don't want this, said Butler, very reluctant to part with the comm screen. It's cheap. A piece of trash. Just give me the watch. Butler peeled back the strap on the instrument on his wrist. If I give you this watch, maybe you can tell me about all these batteries. It is you say, cheese, squealed Carrere, forcing his pudgy thumb into the undersized trigger guard, and pulling. For Butler, time seemed to slow to a crawl. It was almost as though he were inside his personal time stop. His soldier's brain absorbed all the facts and analyzed his options. Carrere's finger was too far gone. In a moment a wide-bore laser burst would be speeding his way, and would continue to bounce around the room until they were both dead. His gun was of no use in a situation like this. All he had was the safety net, but a 6-foot sphere was not going to be enough. Not for two good-sized humans. So in the fraction of a second left to him, Butler formulated a new strategy. If the sphere stopped concussive waves coming in, perhaps it could stop them coming out. Butler touched the screen, and hurled the device in Carrere's direction. Not a nanosecond too soon, a spherical shield blossomed, enveloping the expanding beam. 360 degrees of protection. It was a sight to see, a fireworks display in a bubble. The shield hovered overhead, shafts of light ricocheting against the sphere's curved planes. Carrere was hypnotized by the sight, and Butler took advantage of the distraction to disarm him. Start the engines, grunted the bodyguard into his throat mic. The Sûreté are going to be all over this place in minutes. Foley's safety net didn't stop the noise. Roger that. What about Monsieur Carrere? Butler dumped the dazed Parisian flat on the carpet. Luke and I are going to have a little chat. For the first time Carrere seemed to be aware of his surroundings. Who are you? He mumbled. What's happening? Butler ripped open the man's shirt, placing his palm flat on the PI's heart. Time for a little trick he'd learned from Madame Ko, his Japanese sensei. Don't worry, Monsieur Carrere. I'm a doctor. There's been an accident, but you're perfectly fine. An accident? I don't remember any accident. Trauma. It's quite normal. I'm just going to check your vitals. Butler placed a thumb on Luke's neck, locating the artery. I'm going to ask you a few questions, to check for concussion. Luke didn't argue, then again who'd argue with a 6-foot-plus Eurasian man with muscles like a Michelangelo statue? Is your name Luke Carrere? Yes. Butler noted the pulse rate. One from the heartbeat, and a second reference on the carotid artery. Steady in spite of the accident. Are you a private eye? I prefer the title investigator. No increase in pulse rate. The man was telling the truth. Have you ever sold batteries to a mystery buyer? No, I have not, protested Luke. What kind of doctor are you? The man's pulse skyrocketed. He was lying. Answer the questions, Monsieur Carrere, said Butler sternly. Just one more. Have you ever had dealings with goblins? Relief flooded through Luke. The police did not ask questions about fairies. What are you? Crazy. Goblins. I don't know what you're talking about. Butler closed his eyes, concentrating on the pounding beneath his thumb and palm. Luke's pulse had settled. He was telling the truth. He had never had any direct dealings with the goblins. Obviously the Biwakel weren't that stupid. Butler stood up, pocketing the bouncer. He could hear the sirens on the street below. Hey, doctor, protested Luke. You can't just leave me like this. Butler eyed him coldly. I would take you with me, but the police will want to know why your apartment is full of what I suspect are counterfeit bills. Luke could only watch with his mouth open as the giant figure disappeared into the corridor. He knew he should run, but Luke Carrere hadn't run more than 50 feet since gym class in the 1970s, and anyway his legs had suddenly turned to jelly. The thought of a long stretch in prison can do that to a person. Ireland, en route from St. Bartleby's to Fowl Manor. Artemis was bouncing ideas off Butler, a technique he often used when trying to come up with a plan. After all, if anybody was an expert on covert operations, it was his bodyguard. We can't trace the MPG. No, Artemis. I tried. They put a decay virus in with the email. I only barely managed to get the film on disk before the original disintegrated. What about the MPG itself? Could we get a geographical fix from the stars? Butler smiled. Young Master Artemis was starting to think like a soldier. No luck. I sent a shot to a friend of mine in NASA. He didn't even bother putting it into the computer, not enough definition. Artemis was silent for a minute. How fast can we get to Russia? Butler drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. It depends. Depends on what? On how we go, legal or illegal. Which is quicker? Butler laughed, something you didn't hear very often. Illegal is usually faster. Either way is going to be pretty slow. We can't go by air, that's for sure. The Mafia is going to have foot soldiers at every airstrip. Are we sure it's the Mafia? Butler glanced in the rearview mirror. I'm afraid so. All kidnappings go through the Mafia. Even if an ordinary criminal managed to abduct your father, he would have to hand him over. Artemis nodded. That's what I thought. So we will have to travel by sea, and that will take a week at the very least. We could really use some help with transport. Something the Mafia won't expect. How's our ID situation? No problem. I thought we'd go native. Russians arouse less suspicion in Russia. I have passports and visas. Good. What is our cover? What about Stefan Bashka and his uncle Konstantin? Perfect. The chess prodigy and his chaperone. They had used this cover many times before on previous search missions. Once a checkpoint official, himself a chess grandmaster, had doubted their story, until Artemis beat him in 6 moves. Artemis's technique had since become known as the Bashka maneuver. How soon can we leave? Almost immediately. Mrs. Fowl and Juliet are in Nice this week. That gives us 8 days. We can email the school, make up some excuse. I dare say St. Bartleby's will be glad to be rid of me for a while. We could go straight to the airport from Fowl Manor, the Learjet is stopped. At least we can fly as far as Scandinavia, and we can try to pick up a boat from there. I just have to pick up a few things at the manor first. Artemis could imagine exactly the kind of things his manservant wished to pick up. Dangerous things. Good. The sooner the better. We've got to find these people before they know we're looking. We can monitor email as we go. Butler took the exit for Fowl Manor. You know, Artemis, he said, glancing in the mirror. We're going up against the Russian Mafia. I've had dealings with these people before. They don't negotiate. This could get bloody. If we take these gangsters on, people are going to get hurt. Most likely us. Artemis nodded absently, watching his own reflection in the window. He needed a plan. Something audacious and brilliant. Something that had never been attempted before. Artemis was not unduly worried on that front. His brain had never let him down before. Tara Shuttleport. The ferry shuttleport at Tara was an impressive operation. 30,000 cubic feet of terminal concealed beneath an overgrown hillock in the middle of the McGraney farm. For centuries the McGraneys had respected the ferry fort's boundaries, and for centuries they had enjoyed exceptional good luck. Illnesses mysteriously cleared up overnight, priceless art treasures popped up with incredible regularity, and mad cow disease seemed to avoid their herds altogether. Having solved her visa problem, Holly finally made her way to the security door and slipped through the holographic camouflage. She had managed to secure a set of cowboy double decks for the trip. The rig ran on a satellite-bounced solar battery, and employed a revolutionary wing design. There were 2 sets, or decks, one fixed, for gliding, and a smaller set for maneuverability. Holly had been dying to try the double decks out, but only a few rigs had made their way across from Cowboy Labs. Foley was reluctant to let them out because he hadn't designed them. Professional envy. Holly had taken advantage of his absence from the lab to swipe a set from the rack. She soared 50 feet above the ground, allowing unfilter. Fowl Manor. The original Fowl Castle had been built by Aorn Fowl in the 15th century, overlooking lowlying country on all sides. A tactic borrowed from the Normans. Never let your enemies sneak up on you. Over the centuries, the castle had been extensively remodeled until it became a manor, but the attention to security remained. The manor was surrounded by 3-foot-thick walls, and wired with a state-of-the-art security system. Butler pulled off the road, opening the estate gates by remote control. He glanced back at his employer's thoughtful face. Sometimes he thought that in spite of all his contacts, informants, and employees, Artemis Fowl was the loneliest boy he'd ever met. We could bring a couple of those fairy blasters, he said. Butler had relieved Le Retrieval one of their weaponry during the previous year's siege. Artemis nodded. Good idea, but remove the nuclear batteries and put them in a bag with some old games and books. We can pretend they're toys if we're captured. Yes, sir. Good thinking. The Bentley red tag crunched up the driveway, activating the ground security lights. There were several lamps on in the main house. These were on randomly alternating timers. Butler undid his seatbelt, stepping lithely from the Bentley. You need anything special, Artemis? Artemis nodded. Grab some caviar from the kitchen. You wouldn't believe the muck they feed us in Bartleby's for 10,000 a semester. Butler smiled again. A teenager asking for caviar. He'd never get used to it. The smile withered on his lips halfway to the recently remodeled entrance. A shiver passed across his heart. He knew that feeling well. His mother had used to say that someone had just walked over his grave. A sixth sense. Gut instinct. There was peril somewhere. Invisible, but here nevertheless. Holly spotted the headlights raking the sky from over a mile away. Optics were no good from this vantage point. Even when the automobile's windshield came into view, the glass was tinted and the shadows beyond were deep. Holly felt her heart rate increase at the sight of Fowl's automobile. The car wound along the avenue, flickering between the rows of willow and horse chestnut. Holly ducked instinctively, though she was completely shielded from human eyes. You couldn't be certain with Artemis Fowl's manservant. Last year he had dismantled a fairy helmet and constructed an eyepiece that allowed him to spot and neutralize an entire crack squad of LE retrieval commandos. It was hardly likely that he was wearing the lens at the moment, but as Trouble Kelp and his boys had learned, it didn't pay to underestimate Butler. Holly set the neutrino to slightly above the recommended stun setting. A couple of Butler's brain cells might get fried, but she wasn't about to lose any sleep over it. The car swung into the driveway, crunching across the gravel. Butler climbed out. Holly felt her back teeth grinding. Once upon a time, she had saved his life, healing him after a mortal encounter with a troll. She wasn't sure if she'd do it again. Holding her breath, Holly set the double decks to slow descent. She alighted soundlessly, aiming her weapon at Butler's chest. Now there was a target a sun-blinded dwarf couldn't miss. The human couldn't have detected her presence. Not possible. Yet something made him pause. He stopped and sniffed the air. The mudman was like a dog. No, not a dog, a wolf. Holly focused her helmet lens on the weapon, sending a photo to her computer database. Moments later, a high-res rotating 3D image of the gun appeared in the corner of her visor. Sig Sauer, said a recorded bite of Foley's voice. 9mm. Big bullets. One of these hits you and even magic can't fix it. Other than that, you should be all right, presuming you remembered to wear the regulation above-ground microfiber jumpsuit recently patented by me. Then again, being a recon jock, you probably didn't. Holly scowled. Foley was all the more annoying when he was right. She had jumped on the first available shuttle without even bothering to change into an above-ground suit. Holly's eyes were level with Butler's now, yet still more than 3 feet from the ground. She released the visor seals, wincing at the pneumatic hiss. Butler heard the escaping gas and swung toward the source. Fairy, he said. I know you're there. Unshield or I start shooting. Chapter 4. Fowl is fair. The lower elements, Haven City, Police Plaza, detention cell 4. Artemis woke in the LEP interrogation room. He could have been in any police interview office in the world. Same uncomfortable furniture, same old routine. Root jumped right into it. Okay, Fowl, start talking. Artemis took a moment to get his bearings. Holly and Root were facing him across a low plastic-top table. A bright bulb shone directly into his face. Really, Commander? Is this it? I expected more. Oh, there's more. Just not for criminals like you. Artemis noted that his hands were shackled to the chair. You're not still upset about last year, are you? After all, I won. That is supposed to be that, according to your own book. Root leaned forward, until the tip of his cigar was inches from Artemis's nose. This is an entirely different case, Mud Boy. So don't give me the innocent act. Artemis was unperturbed. Which one are you? Good cop or bad cop? Root laughed heartily, the tip of his cigar drawing patterns in the air. Good cop, bad cop. Hate to tell you this, Dorothy, but you ain't in Kansas anymore. The commander loved quoting The Wizard of Oz. 3 of his cousins were in the movie. A figure emerged from the shadows. It had a tail, 4 legs, 2 arms, and was holding what looked like a pair of common kitchen plungers. Okay, Mud Boy, said the figure. Just relax, and this might not hurt too much. Foley attached the suction cups to Artemis's eyes, and the boy immediately fell unconscious. The sedative is in the rubber seals, explained the centaur. Gets in through the pores. They never see it coming. Tell me I'm not the cleverest individual in the universe. Oh, I don't know, said Root innocently. That pixie cowboy is one pretty sharp female. Foley stamped a hoof angrily. Cowboy, those wings of hers are ridiculous. If you ask me, we're using far too much cowboy technology these days. It's not good to let one company have all LEP's business. Unless it's yours, of course. I'm serious, Julius. I know Opal Cowboy from my days at university. She's not stable. There are Cowboy chips in all the new neutrinos. If those labs go under, all we'd have left are the DNA cannons in Police Plaza and a few cases of electric stun guns. Root snorted. Cowboy just upgraded every gun and vehicle in the force. 3 times the power, half the heat emission. Better than the last statistics from your lab, Foley. This was not exactly the tactical advantage Holly had in mind. Her visor was up, and the manservant's finger was creaking on his pistol's hair trigger. She took a deep breath and shut down her shield. "Hello, Butler," she said evenly. Butler cocked his weapon. "Hello, Captain. Come down slowly, and don't try any of your ... quote. "Put your gun away," said Holly, her voice layered with the hypnotic mesmer. Butler fought it, his gun barrel shaking erratically. "Put it down, Butler. Don't make me fry your brain." A vein pulsed in Butler's eyelid. Unusual, thought Holly. I've never seen that before. "Don't fight me, Mud Man. Give in to it." Butler opened his mouth to speak. To warn Artemis. She pushed harder, the magic cascading around the human's head. "I said, put it down." A bead of sweat ran down the bodyguard's cheek. "Put it down," and Butler did, gradually and grudgingly. Holly smiled. "Good, Mud Man. Now back up to the car, and act as though nothing's wrong." The manservant's legs obeyed, ignoring the signals from his own brain. Holly buzzed up her shield. She was going to enjoy this. Artemis was composing an email on his laptop. "Dear Dr. Guinea, because of your counselor's tactless interrogation of my little Artie, I have taken him out of school for a course of therapy sessions with real professionals in the Mont Gaspard Clinic in Switzerland. I am considering legal action. Do not attempt to contact me, as that would only serve to irritate me further, and when irritated I generally call my attorneys. Sincerely, Angeline Fowl." Artemis sent the message, allowing himself the luxury of a small grin. It would be nice to watch Principal Guinea's expression when he read the electronic letter. Unfortunately, the button camera he'd planted in the headmaster's office could only be accessed within a 1-mile radius. Butler opened the driver's door, and after a moment slipped into the seat. Artemis folded the phone into its wallet. "Captain Short, I presume. Why don't you stop vibrating, and settle into the visible spectrum?" Holly speckled into view. There was a gleaming gun in her hand. "Really, Holly, is that necessary?" Holly snorted. "Well, let's see. Kidnapping, actual bodily harm, extortion, conspiracy to commit murder. I'd say it's necessary. Please, Captain Short," smiled Artemis. "I was young and selfish. Believe it or not, I do harbor some doubts over that particular venture." "Not enough doubts to return the gold." "No," admitted Artemis. "Not quite. How did you know I was here?" Artemis steepled his fingers. There were several clues. 1. Butler did not conduct his usual bomb check under the car. 2. He returned without the items he went to fetch. 3. The door was open for several seconds, something no good security man would permit. And 4. I detected a slight haze as you entered the vehicle. Elementary, really. Holly scowled. Observant little mud boy, aren't you? I try. Now, Captain Short, if you would be so kind as to tell me why you are here. As if you don't know. Artemis thought for a moment. Interesting. I would guess that something has happened. Obviously something that I am being held responsible for. He raised an eyebrow fractionally. An intense expression of emotion for Artemis Fowl. There are humans trading with the people. Very impressive, said Holly. Or it would be, if we didn't both know that you're behind it. And if we can't get the truth out of you, I'm sure your computer files will prove most revealing. Artemis closed the laptop's lid. Captain, I realize there is no love lost between us, but I don't have time for this now. It is imperative that you give me a few days to sort out my affairs. No can do, Fowl. There are a few people underground who would like a word. Artemis shrugged. I suppose, after what I did, I can't really expect any consideration. That's right. You can't. Well then, sighed Artemis. I don't suppose I have a choice. Holly smiled. That's right, Fowl, you don't. Shall we go? Artemis's tone was meek, but his brain was sparking with ideas. Maybe cooperating with the fairies wasn't such a bad idea. They had certain abilities, after all. Why not? Holly turned to Butler. Drive south. Stay on the back roads. Tara, I presume. I've often wondered where exactly the entrance to E1 was. Keep wondering, Mudboy, muttered Holly. Now sleep. All this deduction is wearing me out. But if you want my help, I will require something in return. What exactly? Said Root warily. I need transport to Russia, replied Artemis. The Arctic Circle, to be precise. And I need help with a rescue attempt. Root frowned. Northern Russia is not good for us. We can't shield there because of the radiation. Those are my conditions, said Artemis. The man I intend to rescue is my father. For all I know, it's already too late. So I really don't have time to negotiate. The mud boy sounded sincere. Even Holly's heart softened for a moment. But you never knew with Artemis Fowl, this could all be part of yet another scheme. Root made an executive decision. Deal, he said, holding out his hand. They shook. Fairy and human. A historic moment. Good, said Root. Now, Foley, wake the big one and give that goblin shuttle a quick systems check. What about me? Asked Holly. Back on stakeout duty. If Root had not been a commander, he probably would have cackled. Oh no, Captain. You're the best shuttle pilot we have. You're going to Paris. Opal smoothed the front of her cat suit. Captain Short is escorting the human, Artemis Fowl, to E37. Fowl is here, exclaimed Cudgeon. Of course I should have guessed that he would be suspected. This is perfect. Our human slave, Luke Carrere, will take care of him, too. Carrere has been mesmerized. I still have that power. Cowboy applied a layer of blood-red lipstick. There could be trouble if Carrere is captured. Don't worry, Cudgeon assured her. Monsieur Carrere has been mesmerized so many times that his mind is blanker than a wiped disc. He couldn't tell any tales, even if he wanted to. Then once he has done our dirty work for us, the French police will lock him up in a nice padded cell. Opal giggled. For someone who never smiled, Cudgeon had a delicious sense of humor. Foley threaded a set of fiber optic cables back to the computer. Yes, well, maybe if the council would give me a decent budget. Quote. Quit your moaning, Foley. I saw the budget for this machine, it had better do more than unblock the drains. Foley flicked his tail, highly offended. This is a retimager. I'm considering going private with this baby. And it does what exactly? Foley activated a plasma screen on the holding cell wall. You see these dark circles, these are the human's retinas. Every image leaves a tiny etching, like a photo negative. We can feed whatever pictures we want into the computer and search for matches. Root didn't exactly fall to his knees in awe. Isn't that handy? Well, yes it is, actually. Observe. Foley called up an image of a goblin, cross-referencing it with the retimager's database. For every matching point we get a hit. About 200 hits is normal. General shape of the head, features, and so on. Anything significantly above that and he's seen that goblin before. 186 flashed up on the screen. Negative on the goblin. Let's try a soft nose. Again the count was under 200. Another negative. Sorry, Captain, but Master Fowl here is innocent. He's never even seen a goblin, much less traded with the Biwa-Kel. They could have mind-wiped him. Foley removed the seals from Artemis's eyes. That's the beauty of this baby. Mind wipes don't work. The retimager operates on actual physical evidence. You'd have to scrub the retinas. Anything on the human's computer. Plenty, replied Foley. But nothing incriminating. Not a single mention of goblins or batteries. Root scratched his square jaw. What about the big one? He could have been the go-between. Did him already with the retimager. Nothing. Face it, the Lep have pulled in the wrong mudmen. Wipe em and send em home. Holly nodded. The commander didn't. Wait a minute. I'm thinking. About what? Asked Holly. The sooner we get Artemis Fowl's nose out of our business, the better. Maybe not. Since they're already here. Holly's jaw dropped. Commander, you don't know Fowl the way I do. Give him half a chance, and he'll be a bigger problem than the goblins. Maybe he could help us with our mudman problem. I have to object, Commander. These humans are not to be trusted. Root's face would have glowed in the dark. Do you think I like this, Captain? Do you think I relish the idea of crawling to this mud boy? I do not. I would rather swallow live stink worms than ask Artemis Fowl for help. But someone is powering the Biwa-Kel's arms, and I need to find out who. So get with the program, Holly. There's more at stake here than your little vendetta. Holly bit her tongue. She couldn't oppose the commander, not after all he'd done for her, but asking Artemis Fowl for help was the wrong course of action, whatever the situation. She didn't doubt for a minute that the human would have a solution to their problem, but at what cost? Root drew a deep breath. Okay, Foley, bring him around. And fit him with a translator. Speaking Mudman gives me a headache. Chapter 5 Daddy's Girl Cowboy Laboratories, East Bank. Haven City Cowboy Laboratories was carved from the rock of Haven's East Bank. It stood 8 stories high, surrounded by a mile of granite on 5 sides, with access from the front only. The cowboy people had beefed up their security, and who could blame them? After all, the Beaverkel had specifically targeted the company for arson attacks. The council had gone so far as to grant the company special weapons permits. If Cowboy went under, the entire Haven City defense network went under with it. Any Beaverkel goblins attempting to storm the Cowboy building would have been met with DNA-coded stun cannons, which scanned an intruder before blasting him. There were no blind spots in the building, no place to hide. The system was foolproof. But the goblins didn't have to worry about that. The laboratory's defenses were actually to keep out any LEP officers who might come snooping at the wrong moment. It was Opal Cowboy herself who was funding the Goblin Triad. The attacks on Cowboy were actually a smokescreen to divert suspicions from her actions. The tiny pixie was the mastermind behind the battery operation and the increased Beaverkel activity. Well, one of the masterminds. But why would an individual of almost limitless wealth possibly wish to associate with a Goblin Tunnel gang? Since the day of her birth, nothing much had ever been expected of Opal Cowboy. Born to a family of old money pixies on Principality Hill, she would have made her parents quite content had she attended private school, completed some wishy-washy arts degree, and married a suitable vice president. In fact, her father, Feral Cowboy's dream daughter would have been moderately intelligent, quite pretty, and of course, complacent. But Opal did not display the personality traits Feral would have wished for. By the age of 10 months she was already walking unaided. By a year and a half she had a vocabulary of more than 500 words. Before her second birthday she had dismantled her first hard drive. Opal grew to be precocious, headstrong, and beautiful, a dangerous combination. Feral lost count of the times he had sat his daughter down, advising her to leave business to the male pixies. Eventually, Opal refused to see him at all. Her blatant hostility was worrying. Feral was right to be worried. Opal's first action in college was to ditch her history of art degree in favor of the male-dominated Brotherhood of Master Engineer. No sooner was the scroll in her hand than Opal set up shop in direct opposition to her father. Patents quickly followed. An engine muffler that doubled as an energy streamliner, a 3D entertainment system, and of course her specialty, the double-deck swing series. Once Opal had destroyed her father's business, she proceeded to buy the shares at rock-bottom prices, and then incorporate her businesses under the banner of Cowboy Laboratories. Within 5 years, Cowboy Laboratories held more defense contracts than any other company. Within 10 years, Opal Cowboy had personally registered more patents than any fairy alive, except for the centaur Foley. Artemis massaged the puffy skin beneath his eyes. Sedative in the seals, he said glancing at Foley. Micro needles. The centaur was impressed. You're pretty sharp for a mud boy. Artemis touched the crescent-shaped nodule fixed above his ear. Translator. Foley nodded at the commander. Speaking in tongues gives some people a headache. Artemis straightened his school tie. I see. Now, how can I be of service? What makes you think we need help from you, human? Growled Root around the butt of his cigar. The boy smirked. I have a feeling, Commander, that if you did not need something from me, I would be regaining consciousness in my own bed, with absolutely no memory of our encounter. Foley hid his grin behind a hairy hand. You're lucky you're not waking up in a cell, said Holly. Still bitter, Captain Short. Can't we wipe the slate clean? Holly's glare was all the answer he needed. Artemis sighed. Very well. I shall guess. There are humans trading with the lower elements. And you need Butler to track these merchants down. Close enough. The fairies were silent for a moment. Hearing it from Fowl suddenly brought the reality home to them. Close enough, admitted Root. Okay, Foley, bring Mudboy up to speed. The consultant loaded a file from the LEP Central server. A series of network news clips flashed up on the plasma screen. The reporter was a middle-aged elf with a forelock the size of a tidal wave. Downtown Haven, crooned the reporter. Another contraband seizure by the LEP. Hollywood laser discs with an estimated street value of 500 ounces of gold. The Beaverkel Goblin Triad is suspected. It gets worse, said Root grimly. Artemis smiled. There's worse. The reporter appeared again. This time flames billowed from the windows of a warehouse behind him. His forelock looked a bit crispy. Tonight the Beaverkel have staked their claim to the East Bank by torching a warehouse used by Cowboy Laboratories. Apparently the pixie with the golden touch refused to pay their protection fee. The flames were replaced by another news bite, this time featuring an angry mob. Controversy today outside Police Plaza as the public protest the LEP's failure to deal with the goblin problem. Many ancient houses have been put out of business by the Bewakel's racketeering. Most heavily targeted have been Cowboy Laboratories, who have suffered 6 counts of sabotage in the past month alone. Foley froze the image. The public did not look happy. The thing you have to understand, Fowl, is that goblins are dumb. I'm not insulting them, it's scientifically proven. Brains no bigger than rats. Artemis nodded. So who's organizing them? Root ground out his cigar. We don't know. But it's getting worse. The Bewakel have graduated from petty crime to an all-out war on the police. Last night we intercepted a delivery of batteries from the surface. These batteries are being used to power outlawed soft-nose laser weapons. And Captain Short thought that I might be the mudman on the other end of the deal. Can you blame me? Muttered Holly. Artemis ignored the comment. How do you know the goblins aren't just ripping off wholesalers? After all, batteries are rarely under guard. Foley chuckled. No, I don't think you understand just how stupid goblins are. Let me give you an example. One of the Bewakel generals, and this is their top fairy, was caught trying to pass off a forged credit card, because he signed his own name. No, whoever is behind this would need a human contact to make sure the deals weren't fouled up. So you'd like me to find out who this human contact is, said Artemis. And more importantly, how much he knows. As he spoke, Artemis's mind was racing. He could work this entire situation to his advantage. The people's powers would be valuable aces to hold in a negotiation with mobsters. The seeds of a plan began to sprout in his brain. Root nodded reluctantly. That's it. I can't risk putting LE Precon agents above ground. Who knows what technology the goblins have traded? I could be walking my agents into a trap. As humans, you both could blend in. Butler, blend in, smiled Artemis. I doubt it. At least he doesn't have 4 legs and a tail, observed Foley. Point taken. And there is no doubt that if any man alive can track down your rogue trader, it's Butler. But, here we go, thought Holly. Artemis Fowl does nothing for nothing. But, prompted Root. But it wasn't enough. Opal Cowboy yearned for the kind of power that hadn't been held by any single fairy since the days of the monarchy. Luckily, she knew someone who might be able to assist her with that particular ambition. A disillusioned officer in the LEP, and a classmate from her college days. A certain Briar Cudgeon. Briar had good reason to despise the LEP. After all, they had allowed his public humiliation at the hands of Julius Root to go unpunished. Not only that, but he had been stripped of his commander's acorns after his disastrous involvement in the Artemis Fowl affair. It had been a simple matter for Opal to slip a truth pill into Cudgeon's drink in one of Haven's swankier eateries. To her glee, she found that the delightfully twisted Cudgeon was already formulating a plan to topple the LEP. Quite an ingenious plan, as it happened. All he needed was a partner. One with large reserves of gold and a secure facility at her disposal. Opal was happy to supply both. Opal was curled cat-like in her hoverchair, eavesdropping on Police Plaza, when Cudgeon entered the facility. Well, demanded Cudgeon with customary bluntness. Cowboy didn't bother to turn around. It had to be Briar. Only he had the necessary access chip to the inner sanctum implanted in his knuckle. We lost the last shipment of power cells. A routine LEP stakeout. Bad luck. Darvit, swore Cudgeon. Still, no matter. We have enough stored. And to the LEP, they're simply batteries, after all. Opal took a breath. The goblins were armed. Quote. Don't tell me. With soft noses. Cudgeon pounded a worktop. Those idiots, I warned them not to use those weapons. Now Julius will know something is afoot. He may know, said Opal placatingly. But he is powerless to stop us. By the time they figure it out, it will already be too late. Cudgeon did not smile. He hadn't in over a year. Instead, his scowl grew more pronounced. Good. My time is at hand. Opal Cowboy had installed mole cameras in the LEP network when her engineers were upgrading their system. The units operated on precisely the same frequency as Police Plaza's own surveillance cameras, plus they drew power from the heat leaking from the LEP's fiber optics. Completely undetectable. Perhaps we should have simply manufactured the batteries ourselves, mused Cudgeon. No. Just to build a factory would have set us back 2 years, and there's no guarantee that Foley wouldn't have discovered it. We had no choice. Cowboy swiveled to face her partner. You look terrible. Have you been using that ointment I gave you? Kudgeon rubbed his head tenderly. It was bubbled with horrific lumps. It doesn't work. There's cortisone in it. I'm allergic. Kudgeon's condition was unusual, perhaps unique. The previous year, he had been sedated by Commander Root during the Fowl Manor siege. Unfortunately, the tranquilizer had reacted badly with some band-mind-accelerating substances the former commander had been experimenting with. Kudgeon was left with a forehead like melted tar, plus a droopy eye. Ugly and demoted, not a great combination. You should get those boils lanced. I can barely stand to look at you. Sometimes Opal Cowboy forgot who she was talking to. Briar Kudgeon was not the usual corporate lackey. Kudgeon calmly drew a customized Redboy blaster, firing 2 bursts into the hoverchair's sleeve. The contraption whirled across the stippled rubber tiles, coming to rest sprawled across a bank of hard discs. The disgraced Lep Elf caught Opal by the pointed chin. You'd better get used to looking at me, my dear Opal. Because soon this face will be on every view screen under this planet, and on top of it. The tiny pixie curled her fingers into a fist. She was unaccustomed to insubordination, not to mention actual violence. But at moments like this she could see the madness in Kudgeon's eyes. The drugs had cost him more than his magic and his looks, they had cost him his mind. And suddenly he was himself again, graciously helping her up as though nothing had happened. Now, my dear, progress report. The Bewakel are eager for blood. Chapter 6 Photo Opportunity Shoot E-37, Haven. The unlikely allies took the Goblin shuttle up E-37. Holly was none too pleased. First of all, she was being ordered to work with public enemy number 1, Artemis Fowl. And secondly, the Goblin shuttle was held together by spit and prayers. Holly hooked a comm rig over one pointy ear. Hey, Foley. You there? Right here, Captain. Remind me again why I'm flying this old slammer. LE Precon pilots referred to suspect shuttles as slammers, because of their alarming tendency to slam into the chute walls. The reason you're flying that old slammer, Captain, is that the Goblins built this shuttle inside the port, and all 3 old access ramps were removed years ago. It would take days to get a new rig in there. So, I'm afraid we're stuck with the Goblin ship. Holly strapped herself into the pilot's wraparound seat. The thruster toggles almost seemed to jump into her hands. For a split second Captain Short's natural good humor returned. She was an ace pilot, top of her class in the academy. On her final assessment, Wing Commander Vinyaya had written, Cadet Short could fly a shuttle pod through the gap in your teeth. It was a compliment with a sting in the tail. On her first tryout in a pod, Holly had lost control, crash landing the craft 6 feet from Vinyaya's nose. So for 5 seconds, Holly was happy. Then she remembered who her passengers were. I wonder, could you tell me, said Artemis, settling into the co-pilot's chair, how close the Russian terminal is to Murmansk? Civilians behind the yellow line, growled Holly, ignoring the inquiry. Artemis pressed on. This is important to me. I am trying to plan a rescue. Holly grinned tightly. There's so much irony here, I could write a poem. The kidnapper looking for help with a kidnapping. Artemis rubbed his temples. Holly, I am a criminal. It's what I do best. When I abducted you, I was thinking only of the ransom. You were never supposed to be in any danger. Oh, really, said Holly. Apart from bio-bombs and trolls. True, admitted Artemis. Sometimes plans don't translate smoothly from paper to real life. He paused to clean some non-existent dirt from his manicured nails. I have matured, Captain. This is my father. I need all the information I can gather before facing the Mafia. Holly relented. It wasn't easy growing up without a father. She knew. Her own father had passed away when she was barely 60. More than 20 years ago now. Okay, Mud Boy, listen up. I'm only saying this once. Artemis sat up. Butler's head appeared in the cockpit. He could smell a war story. Over the past 2 centuries, with the advances in human technology, the LEP have been forced to shut down over 60 terminals. We pulled out of northern Russia in the 60s. The entire Kola Peninsula is a nuclear disaster. The people have no tolerance for radiation, we never built up a resistance. In truth, there wasn't much to close down. Just a grade 3 terminal and a couple of cloaking projectors. The people aren't very fond of the Arctic. A bit frosty. Everybody was glad to be leaving. So, to answer your question, there's one unmanned terminal, with little or no above-ground facilities, located about 20 clicks north of Murmansk. Foley's voice blurted from the intercom, interrupting what was dangerously close to a civil conversation. Okay, Captain. You've got a clear run to the subway. There's still a bit of waffle from the last flare, so go easy on the thrusters. Holly pulled down her mouth mic. Roger that, Foley. Have the rad suits ready when I get back. We're on a tight schedule. Foley chuckled. Take it easy on the thrusters, Holly. Technically, this is Artemis's first time in the chutes, seeing as he and Butler were mesmerized on the way down. We wouldn't want him getting a fright. Holly gunned the throttle quite a bit more than was absolutely necessary. No, she growled, we wouldn't want him getting a fright. Artemis decided to strap on his restraining harness. A good idea, as it turned out. Captain Short gunned the makeshift shuttle down the magnetized approach rail. The fins shook, sending twin waves of sparks cascading past the portholes. Holly adjusted the internal gyroscopes, otherwise there'd be mudmen vomiting all over the passenger area. Holly's thumbs hovered over the turbo buttons. Okay, well, let's see what this bucket can do. Don't go trying for any records, Holly, said Foley over the speakers. That ship is not built for speed. I've seen more aerodynamic dwarfs. Holly grunted. After all, what was the point in flying slowly? None whatsoever. And if you happened to terrify a few mudmen along the way, well, that was just an added bonus. The service tunnel opened onto the main chute. Artemis gasped. It was an awe-inspiring sight. You could drop Mount Everest down this chute, and it wouldn't even hit the sides. A deep red glow pulsed from the Earth's core like the fires of hell, and the constant crack of contracting rock smacked the hull like physical blows. Holly fired up all 4 flight engines, tumbling the shuttle into the abyss. Her worries evaporated like the eddies of mist swirling around the cockpit. It was a flyboy thing. The lower you went without pulling out of the dive, the tougher you were. Even the fiery demise of Retrieval Officer Bomb Arbles couldn't stop the LEP pilots from core diving. Holly held the current record. 500 yards before dipping the flaps. That had cost her 2 weeks suspension plus a hefty fine. Not today though. No records in a slammer. With the G-force rippling the skin on her cheeks, Holly dragged the joysticks back, pulling the nose out of vertical. It gave her no small satisfaction to hear both humans sigh with relief. Okay, Foley, we're on the up and up. What's the situation above ground? She could hear Foley tapping a keyboard. Sorry, Holly. I can't get a lock on any of our surface equipment. Too much radiation from the last flare. You're on your own. Holly eyed the 2 pale humans in the cockpit. On my own, she thought. I wish. And so it went on for several months. Luke Carrere hit his contact for every battery he could lay his hands on. It was a sweet deal. Luke would crate the cells up in his apartment, and in the morning they would be gone. In their place would sit a fresh pile of bills. Of course the euros were fake, run off on an old cowboy printer, but Luke couldn't tell the difference, nobody outside the treasury could. Occasionally the voice on the screen would make a special request. Some fire suits for example. But hey, Luke was a player now. Nothing was more than a phone call away. In 6 months Luke Carrere went from a 1-room apartment to a fancy loft in Saint-Germain. So naturally the Sûreté and Interpol were building separate cases against him. But Luke wasn't to know that. All he knew was that for the first time in his corrupt life, he was riding the gravy train. One morning there was another parcel on his new marble-topped desk. Bigger this time. Bulkier. But Luke wasn't worried. It was probably more money. Luke popped the top to reveal an aluminum case, and a second communicator. The eyes were waiting for him. Bonjour, Luke. Car va bien, replied Luke, mesmerized from the first syllable. I have a special assignment for you today. Do this right, and you will never have to worry about money again. Your tool is in the case. What is it? Asked the PI nervously. The instrument looked like a weapon, and even though Luke was mesmerized, Cudgeon did not have enough magic to completely bury the Parisian's nature. The PI might have been devious, but he was no killer. It's a special camera, Luke, that's all. If you pull that thing that looks like a trigger, it takes a picture, said Cudgeon. Oh, said Luke Carrere blearily. Some friends of mine are coming to visit you. And I want you to take their picture. It's just a game we play. How will I know your friends? Asked Luke. A lot of people visit me. They will ask about the batteries. If they ask about the batteries, then you take their picture. Sure. Great. And it was great. Because the voice would never make him do anything wrong. The voice was his friend. E-37 Shuttleport Holly steered the slammer through the chute's final section. A proximity sensor in the shuttle's nose set off the landing lights. Muttered Holly. Artemis squinted through the quartz windshield. A problem. No, it's just that those lights shouldn't be working. There hasn't been a power source in the terminal since the last century. Our goblin friends, no doubt. Holly frowned. Doubtful. It takes half a dozen goblins to turn on a glow cube. Wiring a shuttle port takes real know-how. Elfin know-how. The plot thickens, said Artemis. If he'd had a beard, he would have stroked it. I smell a traitor. Now who would have access to all this technology, and a motive for selling it? Holly pointed the shuttle's cone toward the landing nodes. We'll find out soon enough. You just get me a live trader, and my mesmer will soon have him spilling his guts. The shuttle docked with a pneumatic hiss as the bay's rubber collar formed an airtight seal against the outer hull. Butler was out of his chair before the seatbelt light winked off, ready for action. Just don't kill anyone, warned Holly. That's not how the LEP like to operate. Anyway, dead mudmen don't rat on their partners. She brought up a schematic on the wall screen. It depicted Paris's old city. Okay, she said, pointing to a bridge across the Seine. We're here. Under this bridge, 200 feet from Notre Dame. That's the cathedral, not the football team. The dock is disguised as a bridge support. Stand in the doorway until I give you a green light. We have to be careful here. The last thing we need is some Parisian seeing you emerge from a brick wall. You're not accompanying us? Asked Artemis. Orders, said Holly, scowling. Apparently this could be a trap. Who knows what hardware is pointed at the terminal door. Lucky for you, you're expendable. Irish tourists on holiday, you'll fit right in. Lucky us. What leads do we have? Holly slid a disc into the console. Foley stuck his retimager on the goblin prisoner. Apparently he has seen this human. The captain brought up a mugshot on the screen. Foley got a match on his Interpol files. Luc Carrère, disbarred attorney, does a bit of PI work. She printed off a card. Here's his address. He just moved to a swanky new apartment. It could be nothing, but at least we have somewhere to start. I need you to immobilize him, and show him this. Holly handed the bodyguard what looked like a diver's watch. What is it? Asked the manservant. Just a comm screen. You just put it in front of Carrère's face and I can mesmerize the truth out of him from down here. It also contains one of Foley's doodads. A personal shield. The safety net. A prototype, you'll be delighted to know. You can have the honor of testing it. Touch the screen, and the microreactor generates a 6-foot diameter sphere of tri-phased light. No good for solids, but laser bursts or concussion shocks are okay. Paris, sir, if Artemis wasn't helping Cudgeon in his quest to arm the Biwakel, who was? Some tyrannical dictator, perhaps a disgruntled general with access to an unlimited supply of power cells. Well, no, not exactly. Luc Carrère was the human responsible for selling batteries to the Biwakel. Not that you'd know it to look at him. In fact, he didn't even know it himself. Luc was a small-time French private eye who was well known for his inefficiency. In PI circles, it was said that Luc couldn't trace a golf ball in a barrel of mozzarella. Cudgeon had decided to use Luc for 3 reasons. 1. Foley's files showed that Carrère had a reputation as a wheeler dealer. In spite of his ineptness as an investigator, Luc had a knack for laying his hand on whatever it was the client wanted to buy. 2. The man was greedy and had never been able to resist the lure of easy money. And 3. Luc was stupid. And as every little fairy knows, weak minds are easier to mesmerize. The fact that he had located Carrère in Foley's database was nearly enough to make Cudgeon smile. Of course, Briar would have preferred not to have any human link in the chain. But a chain comprised completely of goblin links is one dumb chain. Establishing contact with any mudman was not something Cudgeon took lightly. Deranged as he was, Briar was well aware what would happen if the humans got wind of a new market underground. They would swarm to the Earth's core like a hive of red-backed flesh-eating ants. Cudgeon was not ready to meet the humans head-on. Not yet. Not until he had the might of the LEP behind him. So instead, Cudgeon sent Luc Carrère a little package. First-class shielded goblin mail. Luc Carrère had shuffled into his apartment one July evening to find a small parcel lying on his desk. The package was nothing more than a FedEx delivery. Or something that looked very much like a FedEx delivery. Luc slit the tape. Inside the box, cushioned on a nest of €100 bills, was a small, flat device of some kind, like a portable CD player, but made from a strange black metal that seemed to absorb light. Luc would have shouted to his receptionist, and instructed his secretary to hold all calls. If he had had a receptionist. If he had had a secretary. Instead, the PI began stuffing cash down his grease-stained shirt as though the notes would disappear. Suddenly, the device popped open, clam-like, revealing a microscreen and speakers. A shadowy face appeared on the display. Though Luke could see nothing but a pair of red-rimmed eyes, that was enough to set goosebumps popping across his back. Funny though, because when the face began to speak, Luke's worries slid away like an old snakeskin. How could he have been worried? This person was obviously a friend. What a lovely voice. Like a choir of angels, all on its own. Luke Carrère. Luke nearly cried. Poetry. Oui, c'est moi. Bonsoir. Do you see the money, Luke? It's all yours. 100 miles underground, Cudgeon almost smiled. This was easier than expected. He had been worried that the dribble of power left in his brain wouldn't be sufficient to mesmerize the human. But this particular mudman seemed to have the willpower of a hungry hog faced with a trough of turnips. Luke held 2 wads of cash in his fists. This money. It's mine. What do I have to do? Nothing. The money is yours. Do whatever you want. Now Luke Carrère knew that there was no such thing as free cash, but that voice. That voice was truth in a micro speaker. But there's more. A lot more. Luke stopped what he was doing, which was kissing a €100 bill. More. How much more? The eyes seemed to glow crimson. As much as you want, Luke. But to get it, I need you to do me a favor. Luke was hooked. Sure. What kind of favor? The voice emanating from the speaker was as clear as spring water. It's simple, not even illegal. I need batteries, Luke. Thousands of batteries. Maybe millions. Do you think you can get them for me? Luke thought about it for about 2 seconds, the notes were tickling his chin. As a matter of fact, he had a contact on the river who regularly shipped boatloads of hardware to the Middle East, including batteries. Luke was confident that some of those shipments could be diverted. Batteries. Oui, certainement, I could do that. Butler entered cautiously. The apartment walls were lined with open crates. Battery packs and fire suits poked through the styrofoam packing. The floor was littered with thick wads of currency. Are you a friend? It was Carrère. He was slumped in an oversized armchair, a weapon of some kind nestled on his lap. Butler approached cautiously. An important rule of combat is that every opponent be taken seriously. Take it easy. The Parisian raised the weapon. The grip was made for smaller fingers. A child, or a fairy? I asked if you were a friend. Butler cocked his own pistol. No need to shoot. Stand still, ordered Carrère. I'm not going to shoot you, just take your photo maybe. The voice told me. Holly's voice sounded in the earpiece. Get closer. I need to see the eyes. Butler holstered his weapon, taking a step forward. You see, no one has to get hurt here. I'm going to enhance the image, said Holly. This may sting a bit. The tiny camera in his eye buzzed, and suddenly Butler's vision was magnified by 4. Which would have been just fine had the magnification not been accompanied by a sharp jolt of pain. Butler blinked a stream of tears from his eye. Below in the Goblin shuttle, Holly studied Luke's pupils. He's been mesmerized, she pronounced. Several times. You see how the iris has actually become jagged. You mesmerize a human too much, and they can go blind. Artemis studied the image. Is it safe to mesmerize him again? Holly shrugged. Doesn't matter. He's already under a spell. That particular mudman is just following orders. His brain doesn't know a thing about it. Artemis grabbed the mic stand. Butler, get out of there. Right now. In the apartment, Butler stood his ground. Any sudden movement might be his last. Butler, said Holly. Listen carefully. That gun pointed at you is a wide-bore low-frequency blaster. We call it a bouncer, it was developed for tunnel skirmishers. If he pulls that trigger, a wide-arc laser is going to ricochet off the walls until it hits something. You should be, continued the Mafia kingpin. Now listen and don't talk. You have nothing to contribute. Vasican covered the handset. Everything's fine, he whispered, giving Kamar the thumbs up. We're doing a great job. The Fowls are a clever outfit, continued Britva, and I have no doubt they're concentrating on tracing the last email. But I spiked the last. What did I tell you? You said not to talk, Mr. Brit, sir. That's right. So send the ransom message and then move Fowl to the drop point. Mickle paled. The drop point. Yes, the drop point. No one will be looking for you there, I guarantee it. But, no more talking, get yourself a spine, man. It's only for a couple of days. So you might lose a year off your life, it won't kill you. Vasican's brain churned, searching for an excuse. Nothing came. Okay, boss. Whatever you say. That's right. Now listen to me. This is your big chance. Do this right, and you move up a couple of steps in the organization. Vasikan grinned. A life of champagne and expensive cars beckoned. If this man really is young Fowl's father, the boy will pay up. When you get the money, dump them both in the cola. I don't want any survivors to start a vendetta. Call me if there's any trouble. Okay, boss. Oh, and one more thing. Yes. Don't call me. The line went dead. Vasikan was left staring at the handset as though it were a handful of plague virus. Well, asked Kamar, we are to send the second message. A broad grin split Kamar's face. Excellent. At last this thing is nearly over. Then we are to move the package to the drop zone. The broad grin disappeared like a fox down a hole. What? Now? Yes. Now. Kamar paced the tiny living room. That is crazy. Completely insane. Fowl cannot be here for a couple of days at the earliest. There's no need for us to spend 2 days breathing in that poison. What is the reasoning? Mikkel extended the phone. You tell him. I'm sure the manager will appreciate being told he is a madman. Kamar sank to the threadbare sofa, dropping his head into his hands. Will this thing never end? His partner fired up their ancient 16-megabyte hard drive. I don't know for certain, he said, sending the prepared message. But I do know what will happen if we don't do what Britva says. Kamar sighed. I think I'll go shout at the prisoner for a while. Will that help? It won't, admitted Kamar. But it will make me feel better. E93, Arctic Shuttleport. The Arctic station had never been high on the fairy tourist list. Sure, icebergs and polar bears were pretty, but nothing was worth saturating your lungs with irradiated air. Holly docked the shuttle in the only serviceable bay. The terminal itself resembled nothing more than a deserted warehouse. Static conveyor belts snaked along the floor, and low-level heating pipes rattled with insect life. Holly handed out human overcoats and gloves from an ancient locker. Wrap up, mud boys. It's cold outside. Artemis did not need to be told. The terminal's solar batteries had long since shut down, and the ice's grip had cracked the walls like a nut in a vice. Holly tossed Butler his coat from a distance. You know something, Butler, you stink. The manservant growled. You and your radiation gel. I think my skin's changed color. Don't worry about it. 50 years and it'll wash right off. Butler buttoned a Cossack greatcoat to his neck. I don't know why you're getting all wrapped up. You've got the fancy suits. The coats are camouflage, explained Holly, smearing rad gel on her face and neck. If we shield, the vibration makes the suits useless. Might as well dip your bones in a reactor core. So for tonight only, we're all humans. Artemis frowned. If the fairies couldn't shield, it would make rescuing his father all the more difficult. His evolving plan would have to be adjusted. Less of the chat, growled Root, pulling a bearskin hat over his pointed ears. We move out in 5. I want everybody armed and dangerous. Even you, Fowl, if your little wrists can support a weapon. Artemis selected a fairy handgun from the shuttle's arsenal. He jacked the battery into its slot, flicking the setting up to 3. Don't worry about me, Commander. I've been practicing. We have quite a stash of LEP weaponry at the manor. Root's complexion cranked up one more notch. Well, there's a big difference between stunning a cardboard cutout and a real person. Artemis smiled his vampire smile. If everything proceeds according to plan, there will be no need for weapons. The first stage is simplicity itself. We set up a surveillance post near Vasikan's apartment. When the opportunity arises, Butler will snatch our Russian friend and the 5 of us can have a little chat. I'm sure that he will tell us everything we need to know under the influence of your mesmer. Then, it will be a simple matter to stun any guards and rescue my father. Root pulled a heavy scarf over his mouth. And what if things don't go according to plan? Artemis's eyes were cold and determined. Then, Commander, we will have to improvise. Holly felt a shiver rattle around her stomach. And it was nothing to do with the climate. The terminal was buried 50 feet below an ice pack. They took the courtesy elevator to the surface, and the party emerged into the Arctic night looking for all the world like an adult and 3 children. Albeit 3 children with inhuman weaponry clanking under every loose fold of cloth. Holly checked the GPS locator on her wrist. We're in the Roster district, Commander. 20 clicks north of Murmansk. What's Foley got on the weather? I don't want to be caught in the middle of a blizzard 20 miles from our destination. No luck. I can't get a line. Magma flares must still be up. Darvit, swore Root. Well, I suppose we'll have to take our chances on foot. Butler, you're the expert here, you take point. Captain Short, bring up the rear. Feel free to boot any human backside if it lags behind. Holly winked at Artemis. No need to tell me twice, sir. I'll bet there isn't, grunted Root, with only the barest hint of a smile playing about his lips. The motley band trudged southeast by moonlight until they reached the railway line. Walking along the sleepers was the only way they could be safe from drifts and suck holes. Progress was slow. A northerly wind snaked through every pore in their clothing, and the cold attacked any exposed skin like a million electric darts. There was little conversation. The Arctic had that effect on people, even if 3 of them were wearing coil-heated suits. Holly broke the silence. Something had been nagging at her for some time. Tell me something, Fowl, she said from behind the boy. Your father. Is he like you? Artemis's step faltered for an instant. That's a strange question. Why do you ask? Well, you're no friend to the people. What if the man we're trying to rescue is the man who will destroy us? There was silence for a long time, except for the chattering of teeth. Holly saw Artemis's chin drop onto his chest. You have no cause to be alarmed, Captain. My father, though some of his ventures were undoubtedly illegal, is a noble man. The idea of harming another creature would be repugnant to him. Holly tugged her boot from 8 inches of snow. So, what happened to you? Artemis's breath bloomed in icy clouds over his shoulder. I made a mistake. Holly squinted at the back of the human's head. Was this actual sincerity from Artemis Fowl? It was hard to believe. Even more surprising was the fact that she didn't know how to react, to extend the hand of forgiveness, or the boot of retribution. Eventually she decided to reserve judgment. For the moment, they passed into a ravine, worn smooth by the whistling wind. Butler didn't like it. His soldier's sense was beating a tattoo on the inside of his skull. He raised a clenched fist. Root doubled his pace to catch up. Trouble. Butler squinted into the snowfield, searching for footprints. Maybe. Nice spot for a surprise attack. Maybe. If anyone knew we were coming. Is that possible? Could someone know? Root snorted, breath-forming clouds in the air before him. Impossible. The chute is totally isolated, and LEP security is the tightest on the planet. And that was when the goblin hit Squad Sword over the ridge. Butler grabbed Artemis by the collar, unceremoniously flinging him into a drift. His other hand was already drawing his weapon. Keep your head down, Artemis. Time for me to earn my salary. Artemis would have responded testily, had his head not been under 3 feet of snow. There were 4 goblins flying in loose formation, dark against the starlit sky. They quickly rose to 1,000 feet, making no attempt to conceal their presence. They neither attacked nor fled, simply hovered overhead. Goblins, grunted Root, pulling a far-shoot neutrino rifle into his shoulder. Too stupid to live. All they had to do was pick us off. Butler picked a spot, spreading his legs for steadiness. Do we wait until we see the whites of their eyes, Commander? Goblin eyes don't have whites, responded Root. But even so, holster your weapon. Captain Short and I will stun them. No need for anyone to die. Butler slid the Sig Sauer into its pouch beneath his arm. It was next to useless at that range, anyway. It would be interesting to see how Holly and Root handled themselves in a firefight. After all, Artemis's life was pretty much in their hands. Not to mention his own. Butler glanced sideways. Holly and the commander were pumping the triggers of various weapons. Without any result. Their weapons were as dead as mice in a snake pit. I don't understand it, muttered Root. I checked these myself. Artemis, naturally, was first to figure it out. He shook the snow from his hair. Sabotage, he proclaimed, tossing aside the useless fairy handgun. There is no other alternative. This is why the Biwakel need soft-nose weapons, because they have somehow disrupted fairy lasers. But the commander was not listening, and neither was Butler. This was no time for clever deductions, this was a time for action. They were sitting ducks out here. Dark against the pale Arctic glow. This theory was confirmed when several soft-nose laser bursts bored hissing holes in the snow at their feet. Holly activated her helmet optics, zooming in on the enemy. It looks like one of them has a soft-nose laser, sir. Something with a long barrel. We need cover. Fast, Butler nodded. Look. An overhang. Under the ridge. The manservant grabbed his charge by the collar, hoisting him aloft as easily as a child would lift a kitten. They struggled through the snow to the shelter of the overhang. Maybe a million years ago the ice had melted sufficiently for a layer of ice to slump slightly, then freeze up again. The resulting wrinkle had somehow lasted through the ages and now could possibly save their lives. They dived underneath the lip, wriggling backward against wall of ice. The icy canopy was easily thick enough to withstand gunfire from any conventional weapon. Butler shielded Artemis with his body, risking an upward glance. Too far. I can't make them out. Holly. Captain Short poked her head from under the frozen ledge, her optics zoomed into focus. Well, what are they up to? Holly waited a beat, until the figures sharpened. Funny thing, she commented. They're all firing now, but what, Captain? Holly tapped her helmet to make sure the lenses were working. Maybe I'm getting some optics distortion, sir, but it looks like they're missing on purpose, shooting way over our heads. Butler felt the blood pounding in his brain. It's a trap, he roared, reaching behind him to grab Artemis. Everybody out, and that was when the goblin charges sent 50 tons of rock, ice, and snow tumbling to earth. They nearly made it. Of course, nearly never won a bucket of squid at Gnomish roulette. If it hadn't been for Butler, not one of the group would have survived. Something happened to him. An inexplicable surge of strength, not unlike the energy bursts that allow mothers to lift fallen trees off their children. The manservant grabbed Artemis and Holly, spinning them forward like stones across a pond. It wasn't a very dignified way to travel, but it certainly beat having your bones pulverized by falling ice. For the second time in so many minutes, Artemis landed nose first in a snowdrift. Behind him, Butler and Root were scrabbling from beneath the ledge, boots slipping on the icy surface. The air was rent by avalanche thunder, and the packed ice beneath them heaved and split. Thick chunks of rock and ice speared the caves opening like bars. Butler and Root were trapped. Holly was on her feet, racing toward her commander. But what could she do? She threw herself back underneath the ledge. Stay back, Captain, said Root's voice in her ear. That's an order, Commander, Holly breathed. You're alive. Somehow, came the reply. Butler is unconscious and we're pinned down. The ledge is on the point of collapsing. The only thing holding it is the debris. If we brush that aside to get out. They were alive, then, at least. Trapped but alive. A plan, they needed a plan. Holly found herself strangely calm. This was one of the qualities that made her such an excellent field agent. In times of excessive stress, Captain Short had the ability to seize upon a course of action. Often the only viable course. In the combat simulation for her captain's exam, Holly had defeated insurmountable virtual enemies by blasting the projector. Technically, she had defeated all her enemies, so the panel had to pass her. Holly spoke into her helmet mic. Commander, undo Butler's moonbelt and strap yourselves on. I'm going to haul you both out of there. Roger, Holly. Do you need a piton? If you can get one out to me. Stand by. A piton dart jetted through a gap in the icy bars, landing a foot from Holly's boots. The dart trailed a length of fine cord. But the commander was not listening, and neither was Butler. This was no time for clever deductions, this was a time for action. They were sitting ducks out here. Dark against the pale Arctic glow. This theory was confirmed when several soft-nosed laser bursts bored hissing holes in the snow at their feet. Holly activated her helmet optics, zooming in on the enemy. It looks like one of them has a soft-nosed laser, sir. Something with a long barrel. We need cover. Fast, Butler nodded. Look. An overhang. Under the ridge. The manservant grabbed his charge by the collar, hoisting him aloft as easily as a child would lift a kitten. They struggled through the snow to the shelter of the overhang. Maybe a million years ago the ice had melted sufficiently for a layer of ice to slump slightly, then freeze up again. The resulting wrinkle had somehow lasted through the ages and now could possibly save their lives. They dived underneath the lip, wriggling backward against wall of ice. The icy canopy was easily thick enough to withstand gunfire from any conventional weapon. Butler shielded Artemis with his body, risking an upward glance. Too far. I can't make them out. Holly. Captain Short poked her head from under the frozen ledge, her optics zoomed into focus. Well, what are they up to? Holly waited a beat, until the figures sharpened. Funny thing, she commented. They're all firing now, but what, Captain? Holly tapped her helmet to make sure the lenses were working. Maybe I'm getting some optics distortion, sir, but it looks like they're missing on purpose, shooting way over our heads. Butler felt the blood pounding in his brain. It's a trap, he roared, reaching behind him to grab Artemis. Everybody out, and that was when the goblin charges sent 50 tons of rock, ice, and snow tumbling to earth. They nearly made it. Of course, nearly never won a bucket of squid at Gnomish roulette. If it hadn't been for Butler, not one of the group would have survived. Something happened to him. An inexplicable surge of strength, not unlike the energy bursts that allow mothers to lift fallen trees off their children. The manservant grabbed Artemis and Holly, spinning them forward like stones across a pond. It wasn't a very dignified way to travel, but it certainly beat having your bones pulverized by falling ice. For the second time in so many minutes, Artemis landed nose first in a snowdrift. Behind him, Butler and Root were scrabbling from beneath the ledge, boots slipping on the icy surface. The air was rent by avalanche thunder, and the packed ice beneath them heaved and split. Thick chunks of rock and ice speared the caves opening like bars. Butler and Root were trapped. Holly was on her feet, racing toward her commander. But what could she do? She threw herself back underneath the ledge. "Stay back, Captain," said Root's voice in her ear. "That's an order, Commander," Holly breathed. "You're alive." Somehow, came the reply. "Butler is unconscious and we're pinned down. The ledge is on the point of collapsing. The only thing holding it is the debris. If we brush that aside to get out." They were alive, then, at least. Trapped but alive. A plan. They needed a plan. Holly found herself strangely calm. This was one of the qualities that made her such an excellent field agent. In times of excessive stress, Captain Short had the ability to seize upon a course of action. Often the only viable course. In the combat simulation for her captain's exam, Holly had defeated insurmountable virtual enemies by blasting the projector. Technically she had defeated all her enemies, so the panel had to pass her. Holly spoke into her helmet mic. "Commander, undo Butler's moonbelt and strap yourselves on. I'm going to haul you both out of there." "Roger, Holly. Do you need a piton? If you can get one out to me." "Stand by." A piton dart jetted through a gap in the icy bars, landing a foot from Holly's boots. The dart trailed a length of fine cord. Holly snapped the piton into the cord receptacle on her own belt, making sure there were no kinks in the line. Meanwhile, Artemis had dragged himself from the drift. "This plan is patently ridiculous," he said, brushing the snow from his sleeves. "You cannot hope to drag their combined weight with sufficient velocity to both break the icicles and avoid being crushed." "I'm not going to drag them," snapped Holly. "Well, then, what is?" Captain Short pointed down the track. There was a green train winding its way toward them. "That is," she said. There were 3 goblins left. Their names were Denal, Iman, and Nile. 3 rookies vying for the recently vacated lieutenant's spot. Lieutenant Pole had handed in his resignation when he'd strayed too close to the avalanche and been swatted by a 1-ton pane of transparent ice. They hovered at 1,000 feet, well out of range. Of course, they weren't out of fairy weapon range, but LEP weapons weren't operational at the moment. Cowboy Laboratories upgrades had seen to that. "That was some hole in Lieutenant Pole," whistled Iman. "I could see right through him. And I don't mean that like he was a bad liar." Goblins didn't get too attached to each other. Considering the amount of backstabbing, backbiting, and general vindictiveness that went on in the Biwa Kel, it didn't pay to make any special friends. "What you think?" asked Denal, the handsome one, relatively speaking. "Maybe one of you guys should take a spin down there." Iman snorted. "Sure thing. We go down and get sparked by the big one. Just how dumb do you think we are? The big one is out of the picture. I sparked him myself." "Sweet shot." "My shot set off the avalanche," objected Nile. "The baby of the gang. You're always claiming my kills." "What kills? The only thing you ever killed was a stink worm. And that was an accident." "Rubbish," sulked Nile. "I meant to kill that worm. He was bugging me." Iman swooped between the two. "All right. Keep your scales on the pair of you. All we gotta do is throw a few rounds into the survivors from up here." "Nice plan, genius," sneered Denal. "Except it won't work." "And why not?" Denal pointed below with a manicured nail. "Because they're boarding that train." Holly snapped the piton into the cord receptacle on her own belt, making sure there were no kinks in the line. Meanwhile, Artemis had dragged himself from the drift. "This plan is patently ridiculous," he said, brushing the snow from his sleeves. "You cannot hope to drag their combined weight with sufficient velocity to both break the icicles and avoid being crushed." "I'm not going to drag them," snapped Holly. "Well, then, what is?" Captain Short pointed down the track. There was a green train winding its way toward them. "That is," she said. There were 3 goblins left. Their names were Denal, Iman, and Nile. 3 rookies vying for the recently vacated lieutenant's spot. Lieutenant Pole had handed in his resignation when he'd strayed too close to the avalanche and been swatted by a 1-ton pane of transparent ice. They hovered at 1,000 feet, well out of range. Of course, they weren't out of fairy weapon range, but LEP weapons weren't operational at the moment. Cowboy Laboratories upgrades had seen to that. That was some hole in Lieutenant Pole, whistled Iman. I could see right through him. And I don't mean that like he was a bad liar. Goblins didn't get too attached to each other. Considering the amount of backstabbing, backbiting, and general vindictiveness that went on in the Biwa Kel, it didn't pay to make any special friends. What you think? Asked Denal, the handsome one, relatively speaking. Maybe one of you guys should take a spin down there. Iman snorted. Sure thing. We go down and get sparked by the big one. Just how dumb do you think we are? The big one is out of the picture. I sparked him myself. Sweet shot. My shot set off the avalanche, objected Niall. The baby of the gang. You're always claiming my kills. What kills? The only thing you ever killed was a stink worm. And that was an accident. Rubbish, sulked Niall. I meant to kill that worm. He was bugging me. Iman swooped between the two. All right. Keep your scales on the pair of you. All we gotta do is throw a few rounds into the survivors from up here. Nice plan, genius, sneered Denal. Except it won't work. And why not? Denal pointed below with a manicured nail. Because they're boarding that train. 4 green carriages were winding in from the north, dragged along by an ancient diesel engine. A maelstrom of snow flurries coiled in its wake. Salvation, thought Holly. Or perhaps not. For some reason the mere sight of the clanking locomotive set her stomach bubbling with acid. Still, she was in no position to be choosy. It's the Mayak chemical train, said Artemis. Holly glanced over her shoulder. Artemis seemed even paler than usual. The what? Environmentalists worldwide call it the green machine, something of an irony. It transports spent uranium and plutonium assemblies to the Mayak chemical combine for recycling. One driver locked up in the engine. No guards. Fully loaded, this thing is hotter than a nuclear submarine. And you know about this because. Quote. Artemis shrugged. I like to keep track of these things. After all, radiation is the world's problem. Holly could feel it now. Uranium tendrils eating through the rad gel on her cheeks. That train was poison, but it was her only chance of getting the commander out alive. This just keeps getting better and better, Holly muttered. The train was closer, obviously, motoring along at about 10 clicks. No problem for Holly on her own, but with 2 men down and 1 next to useless Mudboy, it was going to take quite a feat to get on board that locomotive. Holly spared a second to check on the goblins. They were holding steady at 1,000 feet. Goblins were no good at improvisation. This train was unexpected, it would take them at least a minute to work out a new strategy. The big hole in their fallen comrade might give them further pause for thought. Holly could feel the radiation emanating from the carriages, burning through the tiniest gap in the radiation gel, prickling her eyeballs. It was only a matter of time before her magic ran out. After that, she was living on borrowed time. No time to think about that now. Her priority was the commander. She had to get him out of here alive. If the Biwa Kel were brazen enough to mount an operation against the LEP, there was obviously something pretty big going on underground. Whatever it was, Julius Root would be needed to spearhead the counterattack. She turned toward Artemis. Okay, Mudboy. We've got one shot at this. Grab onto whatever you can. Artemis couldn't hide an apprehensive shiver. Don't be afraid, Artemis. You can make it. Artemis bristled. It's cold, fairy. Humans shiver in the cold. That's the spirit, said the LEP captain, and she began to run. The piton wire played out behind her like a harpoon cable. Though it had the approximate grade of fishing line, the cable could easily suspend 2 struggling elephants. Artemis raced after her as fast as his loafered feet could manage. They ran parallel to the tracks, feet crunching through the snow. Behind them the train grew closer, pushing a buffer of air before it. Artemis struggled to keep up. This was not for him. Running and sweating. Combat for heaven's sake. He was no soldier. He was a planner. A mastermind. The hurly-burly of actual conflict was best left to Butler and people like him. But his manservant wasn't here to take care of the physical tasks this time. And he never would be again, if they didn't manage to board this train. Artemis's breath came short, crystallizing in front of his face, blurring his vision. The train had drawn level now, steel wheels spewing ice and sparks into the air. Second carriage, panted Holly. There's a runner. Mind your footing. Runner. Artemis glanced behind. The second carriage was coming up fast. But the noise was blurring his vision. Was that possible? It was terrific. Unbearable. There, below the steel doors. A narrow board. Wide enough to stand on. Barely. Holly alighted easily, flattening herself against the carriage wall. She made it look so effortless. A simple skip, and she was safe from those pulverizing wheels. Come on, Fowl, shouted Holly. Jump. Artemis tried, he really did. But the toe of his loafer snagged on a sleeper. He stumbled forward, pinwheeling for balance. A painful death came rushing up to meet him. 2 left feet, muttered Holly, grabbing her least favorite mudboy by the collar. Momentum swung Artemis forward, slamming him into the door. The piton cord was slapping against the carriage. Only seconds left before Holly departed from the train as quickly as she'd arrived. The LEP captain searched for a strongpoint to anchor herself.